Well, I'm just so glad that Glenn mentioned spiral dynamics and how our thinking evolves from, first to sort of a legalistic copying the old framework to a new, and then emerging to something more dynamic and interactive with people. And I do appreciate that he has a fixed document for ratification now, but I'd love to see how you'd like to interact to continue to evolve from that, as you said, maybe after ratification or to plan beyond it for your future books, but toward more fluid, interactive global system. I know, Gary Davis talked about, a integrity system that doesn't wait for, global system that starts as something that's interactive between people like these kind of Zoom talks, but has certain tools and advantages that are bringing to the top the highest and best wisdom, and people start interacting with that, and it starts becoming something so valuable, like an app that everybody wants to do it, and you begin to give it teeth by creating citizen forms of enforcement. And I think there's ways we can. I love all these different methods. Every path is important because they're all doing what you said, raising the consciousness that we have to think globally and think as world citizens. But I do, I guess, ask as you continue to write books and in this field, do you want to continue to move the vision forward into a more interactive, blockchain-oriented, people-oriented system, synergistic system?
Well,
thank you, Arthur.
One of the things that we have been developing the last few years is a response to a number of criticisms that said the Constitution is top down, right? It's like this one blueprint for everybody, and it's we have all kinds of projects going on around the world, run by WCPA people, feeding people in India who, and the rest of it, educating people and so on, and it's synergistically the top and the bottom need to be together in what I call holarchy, right? A holarchy isn't just an anarchy of everybody doing their own thing. A holarchy means the top and the bottom interact in a healthy and spiritually awakened way, a holism. So I'll send you a copy of my book when it comes out in May, Arthur, and you can you can address that question in terms of my arguments there, but ultimately it's another very large question, right? We're still on Article 1 and it's a very large question, but I think all the interaction and the synergy is excellent, spiral dynamics, excellent, but I think the Constitution as a fixed document is a key to helping us move forward. That's my argument now.
Great. Glenn, let me ask you a quick question from a facilitation standpoint. Since we've covered 2 of the 10 sections that we're trying to cover in an hour, and we have a little more than a half hour to go, do you think it would make sense for you to go through the rest of the articles up through 9, and then we'll take questions through to the end of the time?
Okay, that sounds fine.
Great, thank you. So take it away.
Okay, Article 2, the key is 2.2, bottom of page 29, right? World government for the Federation of Earth shall be non-military and shall be democratic in its own structure, with ultimate sovereignty residing in all the people who live on the earth. All right, this question of sovereignty is a long one in philosophy of law, which I'm teaching a course right now in philosophy of law, and I think it's something that needs to be appreciated, and that is that the only legitimate sovereignty, Errol Harris, philosopher Errol Harris also makes this same argument, that the only legitimate sovereignty is the sovereignty that comes from the people of Earth themselves, as expressed in the Earth Constitution, because sovereignty means that it has 2 features to it. One is that a government has power over its territory. it has the capacity to enforce laws. But the other feature sovereignty has for most philosophers of law is legitimacy, right? A government the Nazi government was powerful over its territories, but it was not legitimate, right? And legitimacy requires democracy, consent of the government, governed, and so on. So no nation on earth is legitimate anymore because the legitimacy comes from a nation, a government, serving the common good of its citizens, right? There's no nation on earth can do this because the common good is now planetary. There's no nation on earth that can get rid of those nuclear weapons that are endangering us every single day of the year, right? There's no nation on earth that can protect the global environment. There's no nation on earth that can give us universal human rights protection. So every government on earth is illegitimate because they do not recognize the only truly legitimate sovereignty, which is the sovereignty of the people of earth, the common good of everybody. We're all the same. We all have the same rights. We all have the same dignity. That's what has to be recognized. And that's fundamental to the Earth Constitution. Okay, so Article 3 is, you see that on page 31, that's the organs. It's just simply a list of the main organs: the World Parliament, the World Executive, World Administration, Integrative Complex, the World Judiciary, Enforcement System, and the World Ombudsman. And then Article 4, and this is the one I mentioned earlier. If you're worried about Article 1 being too comprehensive, Article 4 gives the sovereign people of Earth all kinds of powers, right? Power to prevent war and armed conflict, to supervise disarmament, to prohibit incitement to war, right? To provide the means for peaceful and just solutions. And then it goes on, in 41 different items and here's the key thing. Right now, I think, the world is dominated by the global banking cartels, World Bank, IMF, the global imperial nations, China, Russia, United States, the global multinational corporations, and the super rich who own a tiny group of whom own 50% of the world's wealth, right? We need, if we're going to have a decent future on this planet, we need to put the people of Earth in power over those gigantic forces. They have to be over the banking cartels. Get rid of the Federal Reserve in the United States, which is a private banking cartel, right? They have to be over the multinational corporations, which now do pretty much whatever they feel like doing. It must be over the giant militarized nation states. You've got to have the authority to disarm the United States and disarm China and disarm, how are we going to do this unless we have the people of Earth recognizing their sovereignty and having a means to do that? And that means is the Earth Constitution, right? So that's what Article 4 does. It gives the people of Earth the authority to protect the global environment. And it says, for example, one big issue right now is the question of the global commons, right? This article, The Tragedy of the Commons, came out in the 1960s, and people said, if you have a commons, it's going to get ruined by everybody trying to use it. And so I have argued in articles that the global commons needs to be owned by the people of Earth, right? The UN Sustainable Development Goals in item 18 of their document says that every nation owns its own natural resources, its own economic processes, every nation within its borders had control of its own water and air and so on. This is a prescription for disaster for the earth, because it allows, for example, under the UN system, the SDG system, it allows Brazil to destroy the lungs of the earth, right? We know that most of the lungs of the earth, there's some in Ecuador and the other nations there, but most of the lungs of the earth are in Brazil. And right now, the government of Brazil is cutting down and destroying the lungs of the earth. And under the UN system, they have the legal right to do this, right? The US in 2016, President Trump became president. He withdrew from the Paris Climate Accords, right? The US has the legal right to do that, right? China, industrializing for the last 20 or 30 years, is putting carbon dioxide by millions and millions of tons a day into the global atmosphere. They have the legal right to do this within their territorial boundaries, right? And the Earth Constitution says no. The atmosphere of the earth belongs to the people of Earth, right? The oceans of the earth, which are now being destroyed by overfishing and the so-called Convention of the Sea, isn't working at all. Environmentalists point this out right and left. The oceans of the earth are dying, but those oceans belong to the people of Earth, just as the air and the water and the lungs of the earth, the forests, everything necessary to make a healthy living for future generations. They belong to, that's why the people of Earth need to be sovereign, right? So anyway, that's kind of a summary of all this stuff that go in Article 4. It gives real authority to the government, and I think it's necessary if they're going to salvage the earth. Okay, Article 5, functions and powers of the World Parliament. It's a parliamentary system, right? The ultimate authority in this system is the World Parliament, and it's got, as you know, it's got three houses: the House of Peoples, the House of Nations, and the House of Councillors. And the House of Peoples is by far the largest house. It will have 1,000 representatives from 1,000 electoral districts around the world, roughly equal by population. Then the House of Nations will have 1, 2, or 3 representatives from each nation. And the nations decide how they're going to choose these representatives. So the bigger nations with large populations, they'll have 3 representatives in the House of Nations. Little tiny nations like Haiti or Cuba will have 1 representative in the House of Nations. So you maybe will have 300 people there. And then there'll be 200 people in the House of Councillors. And this is a unique feature of this Constitution, because the House of Councillors is an attempt to get wise people into government. And so students and faculty around the world, from the 20 world administrative districts, the 1,000 electoral districts will be clumped together in 20 world administrative districts. And students and faculty will be voting to nominate the best people, right? The students know who their professors are, who are great environmentalists or great human rights leaders and so on. The best people will be nominated, and then they will be elected by the other 2 houses of the World Parliament. And so we'll have 200 people who have a unique role. The House of Councillors has a unique role. Primarily its role is nominations for positions, right? So it isn't like the United States where you get into Congress real dumb people, right? Let's just face it, there's some mighty dumb people there, this Marjorie Greene who comes in with her gun and so on. This will attempt to get wise people who represent the good of the whole into the World Parliament. So these 1,500 people are the ultimate authority, and then under them there's the various organs, right? And in terms of in terms of Article 6, right, one of the organs is the World Executive. So the World Executive, like all the other organs, this is a very important point. There's no single person elected to head these agencies, any of the agencies, right? The World Executive will be a presidium of 5 persons, and they'll have a World Cabinet of 20 to 30 persons. And these 5 persons will be elected by the World Parliament in joint session, in combined session. And so they will be the head of the World Executive, and their job, like any executive branch, is to implement the decisions of the legislative branch, to implement all the programs that are necessary to run a world. And so they will be the head of the world administration, right? And you'll have, just to jump ahead, you can see at the end of the world administration on pages 47 and 48, there's 28 different departments, right? Department on multinational corporations, a Department of Transportation, Department of Commerce and Industry, a Department of Science and Technology, Department of Education, and so on, Department of Democratic Procedures, right? So their job is to just run the Earth Constitution, run the world government according to the Earth Constitution. Notice number 4 on page 44, item 6.6, limitations on the World Executive. Okay, the World Executive may not at any time alter, suspend, abridge, or infringe, or otherwise violate any provision of this World Constitution. 6.6.2, the World Executive may not have veto power. So much better than the US system, right, with the stupid veto power given to the president. It may not veto, right? The World Executive may not dissolve the World Parliament or any house of the Parliament. World Executive may not act contrary to the decisions of the World Courts. The World Executive is bound faithfully to execute all legislation, right? The World Executive may not transcend or contradict the decisions and controls of the World Parliament, the World Judiciary, and the provisions of this Constitution by any device of executive order, executive privilege, or emergency declaration or decree. Not only that the world attorneys general, right, the prosecutors in the world courts and so on, in the world civilian world police are not under the authority of the World Executive like they are in the United States. Right? The world police are completely, and the world attorneys general are a completely independent agency responsible directly to the World Parliament. So this executive is not going to have any enforcement means by which to disrupt, right? The executive is always a dangerous thing. In the modern world of supersonic weapons carrying nuclear warheads, right, the executive branches have become immensely powerful, right? And legislative and judicial, much less so in all these countries, right? Because you got to have that presidential football carried around in case they want to wipe out humanity, you know, in some decision, you know. It's ridiculous. It's absurd. So the world administration this is Article 7, functions under the leadership of the executive cabinet, and this describes the functioning of the administration and in what way the departments of the administration will be staffed and so on. And what they will be doing, every person who's in the executive cabinet of the presidium has 5 people, right? It requires, when the World Parliament elects these 5, it requires that they be elected one from each continent, right? So you can't have two from any one continent. You've got to have one from Asia, one from Europe, one from North America, one from South America, one from Africa, right? And this is the same with the other, all the other agencies. 5, they're all run by a presidium of 5, often supplemented by larger cabinets and so on, but there's no single person that's ever the head of anything in this Constitution, right? So the departments we looked at listed on page 47 and 48. The integrative complex, very important, and I could spend hours on this, but I won't, Bob, because we have one more item after Article 8. But the integrative complex is available to all the organs of government. Their job is to serve the Parliament, and to serve the houses of Parliament, and to serve the administration, and to serve the World Ombudsman and everything else. So they're staffed by people who are experts and from the World Civil Service Administration, which is the very first of these 7 different agencies. And so civil service, you got to have a world civil service of competent people, right, who are known to be good at what they do, and they've got the proper degrees and so on. You've got to have a world boundaries and elections administration, right? And that is, I think there's a key passage in that on page 50, 8.3.1.5, which is at the bottom of the last paragraph on page 50. And that is before each World Parliamentary election to prepare voters' information booklets, which will summarize major current public issues and shall list each candidate for elective office together with standard information about each candidate and give space for each candidate to state his or her views on the defined major issues, right? They're taking elections out of the marketplace like they are in the United States, right? Multinational corporations or rich people will not be able to fund, this person running for, a Republican position or whatever, some nutcase, they're taking, this is the opposite of Citizens United, right? Everybody will have the same space because you're going to have a different world under this Constitution. A different world means that it won't be political parties rabid to seize control because they're serving some ruling class, right? The Republicans serve the ruling class. The first thing they did under Trump was give huge tax breaks to the super rich in the United States, right? If you have government that is dedicated to the service of humanity, you're not going to have this, right? The sovereign people of the earth will be above the rich. And they will take steps, not violent steps, but procedural and carefully designed steps to eliminate that vast discrepancy between the rich and the poor that now distorts every democracy on earth. So that's a key passage there. And then the Institute on Governmental 8.4, the Institute on Governmental Procedures and World Problems, they will be educating everybody who gets elected to Parliament. All 1,500 people will take courses in government procedures, courses in world problems, courses in how the Constitution deals with these world problems, right? They will be educated, right, in very, very carefully done processes, because we want people in the World Parliament to know what the hell they're doing, right? It's not a matter of power, like Mitch McConnell trying to keep power for the Republicans or whatever. It's absurd. It's an absurd way to do government. And so this makes sense out of government. So 8.5, the Agency for Research and Planning. If you've read Donna Meadows, right? Donna Meadows and her colleagues made a very well-known book called The Limits to Growth, and it came out in 1972. And then they did a 30-year update on the limits to growth that came out in 2002. And they said, if we want a decent environment for our planet, we have to extend the planning horizon for the world. We have to improve the monitoring of the human impact worldwide. We have to speed up response times to degradation and difficulties in environmental destruction. We have to prevent the erosion of renewable resources, they said. And we have to use all resources with maximum efficiency. And we have to stop exponential expansion of population and physical capital. Those were their 6 recommendations, right? If we want sustainability, this is what these agencies, the next 3 agencies, Research and Planning, and the Technological and Environmental Assessment Agency that follows this one, that's what they're about, right? Our world, if it's going to survive past the next century, is going to have to be monitored. The environment, everywhere. The impact of human activity. The population of the world is going to have to be reduced voluntarily, right? And we're going to have to extend the planning horizon beyond 4 years, right? It's got to be 50 years, right? 60 years, 100 years. That has to be a planning horizon. And this can only happen through world government. There's no country on earth that plans ahead that far, right? With China, it's 5-year plans, right? And so on. So this is what the world needs if it's going to survive. And then the agency on page 54, the next agency, Agency for Technological and Environmental Assessment, its job is to maintain a global monitoring of the environment, right? So that we see how the oceans are regenerating, or the soil is regenerating, or not. And so they're monitoring the environment. They're monitoring the effect of technologies on the environment, protecting the earth as a single biospheric whole. So then 8.7, the last significant one in the integrative complex. This is absolutely fundamental, because this answers, I think, Bob's question earlier a little bit. How are we going to pay for it, right? Because what this does, I don't know if any of you have read Ellen Brown's book, The Web of Debt. It came out in 2007. You should read that book, right? She's not the only author that's written about this, but for years I attended the meetings of the American Monetary Institute and their analysis, right? Private banking is an absurdity. Private banking is the ownership of the creation of money by private interests, not in the public interest, right? And what this does, what subsection 8.7.1.5 and 1.6 and 1.7 is establish global public banking, so that money will be like the roads, right? We don't privatize the roads because everybody needs the roads, right? They have to be public. The government has to maintain them. It's the same with money, right? Money, everybody needs money. Everybody has to interact with money and so on. And it's absurd to have that money creation in private hands. The Federal Reserve in the United States, private banks, a consortium of private banks. We create money in the United States as debt, right? And that's why the American people are like $17 trillion in debt. It's absurd. It doesn't need to happen, right? So this will give us unlimited resources, right? If money is not created in order to feed the super rich, if it's created for the benefit of humanity, it will give people the planet Earth the resources it needs to do everything necessary to keep a decent world system. Okay, I'm going as fast as I can, Bob.
You're
The,
doing great, Glenn. Thank you.
8.8, the Commission for Legislative Review will simply, look at legislation to make sure it's well written, and you've got to have good legislation, and we're very well aware of that, because we have sessions of the Provisional World Parliament in which we try to pass provisional world legislation. So we're following proper form and for legislation and so on. So they will do that. They will integrate international law with the emerging world law, and so on. So finally, Article 9, the last article for today, the world judiciary creates a world court system. And the world court system will, it goes into how the judges are chosen. They have to be at least 30 years old. They have to have extensive legal experience. They also have to have extensive awareness of the humanities, which I think is excellent. And so they will be, they'll be certified as people who are truly experts in their field. And this will create a consortium, a collegium of world judges, and it's from 20 to 60 members in the collegium. And so this article describes how they're to be organized. They, like all the other agencies, they will elect 5 of the judges to be the presidium of the judges. So there'll be one from each continent in this as head of the Collegium of World Judges. And then they will distribute the justices into 8 different benches, right? The bench for human rights, a bench for criminal cases, a bench for civil cases, a bench for constitutional cases, a bench for international conflicts, a bench for public cases with big consequences. They'll keep a separate bench for those, an appellate bench, and an advisory bench. The advisory branch will give legal advice to any people in the World Parliament, any agencies of the government in an official capacity. If they want to know how this conforms to the Constitution, they will give them an advisory opinion. So the the world court system, and this can have subcourts, right? It's not just the 8 benches of a Supreme Court, but just like federal courts in the United States, you have various levels of federal authority, and this will have various levels of global authority throughout the world. So that world law will be enforced by the world police, who is Article 10, right? We're not going to look at that. And they'll be enforced, they'll be protected by the world ombudsman, Article 11, and the Collegium of World Judges, giving us a world of law rather than now it's a world of power. Even the nations of the world have the ability not to obey the International Criminal Court or the International Court of Justice because they're sovereign. Their sovereignty comes first. So that's Article 9. Right? Okay, I'll stop there.